Okay. Everybody hear me okay? Recording has started.
Yep.
So this, let's see, where's Miles? Is that who we're missing? Let me go ahead and get going. So this begins the annual retreat portion of the meeting, which is essentially a work session in which the Conservation Land Bank commissioners and staff can take a deep dive on big picture topics. And at the close of the meeting, there will be an opportunity for public comments. Today's topic focuses on the idea of creating something along the lines of a strategic plan for the land bank to guide future direction and priorities. Lincoln sent us some samples to consider. We hope our goal for the meeting is or my goal for the meeting is that the commissioners can reach consensus on whether we should devote resources to creating such a document, and if so, what should it look like, what type of outreach, and if there are any other organizational activities we should consider pursuing in 2023 in preparation for the anticipated 2024 vote on reauthorization of the Conservation Land Bank Real Estate Excise Tax. So here to guide us in our discussion is our longtime facilitator, John Howell of the Cedar River Group in Seattle. John, for anyone who hasn't attended our meetings that he's facilitated, he has more than 30 years experience working with organizations and nonprofits in various consultant roles, including facilitator and negotiator. He also has strong ties to the San Juans, and he's worked with the land bank to successfully facilitate many of our prior retreats. But before we get into that portion, and the facilitator-led discussion, we will first hear from Lincoln to summarize outcomes from our previous retreat, which we had in February. Go ahead, Lincoln.
Yeah. On the Marilyn just walked into the room, O'Connor, so she's here.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to take you through a few things that have happened. So I put together this memo that you all received, where there are two basic parts. One is the last part, which is where we are in the action items from the last retreat. And then the second part is really kind of everything else that we've done over the past year. If you remember, our last retreat was actually in February, so we've had a condensed year, but a lot has happened over that period. I don't know that I need to go through everything in great detail, but obviously we've had some highly significant acquisitions through the course of the year. We've been very successful in finding partners on projects. So that's been really, really great, particularly the San Juan Preservation Trust. In terms of administration, this year, like all years, has been extremely busy in that we've done 4 amended budgets. And so each one of those requires quite a bit of work and process to go through. But we got through all of that. And in terms of stewardship, lots of conservation easements have been monitored. There may be a couple that are still outstanding, but for the most part, all of those are done. And we've just had a phenomenal amount of work going on in stewardship with partnerships and projects across all of the islands. And there are just way too many things to to list through here. You have it in the memo. And that itself is a summary, incredibly concise summary of what folks have been doing over the course of the year. So just moving on down a little bit to the action items from the last retreat. And so I think the first one, which was kind of took a bit of a twist this year, but we talked at the retreat about how to deal with controversial projects. And I think this really, the impetus for that went back to the Clure acquisition years ago, really, and how we were able to deal with that particular project. And recognizing the fact that sometimes some of the projects we do are not without controversy. And in that case, we had some neighbors who were concerned about creating that preserve on Lopez with access to the shoreline. And so a lot of this, the idea for this action item was really to talk about how we can address those issues. In this past year, we did not have, I would say, an external controversy about acquisitions. I think all three of the acquisitions that we did were quite popular with the public. So this item didn't really happen. Obviously, we had a big issue with the Glenwood or North Shore project, but that was really more of an internal county issue than an external issue. So it was a bit different, but we spent a lot of time on that. So next up, we talked about doing quarterly public meetings. We have been doing over the past few years 2 meetings, at least 2, well, a fall and a spring meeting. One of those is combined. One of those is 3 separate meetings on 3 different islands, and we have followed through with those. This question was really something I think that Sandy brought up about the idea of doing quarterly meetings on each island, probably envisioning more that we would have a normal society and actually be able to have meetings on islands and have public attend.
I have no recollection of making this suggestion at all. I was like, oh.
Yeah, so
I think, yeah.
We can shoot for this next year, but I don't think really need to say too much more on that. It's just been extraordinarily difficult. I think we've done quite well in having the community meetings that we've had and trying to do as much outreach as we can to get people to come to regular meetings. So that was that one. Another one was about the format and structure of the fact sheet about tax impact, which has been redone. I think, though, that what we haven't done is really kind of combine that sheet with what we do in the annual report, where we have a page typically that's dedicated to this subject, and it's very infographic heavy. And we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on that page. But I think what we haven't done is turn that into a full page fact sheet using that approach. So that's something that we'll be talking about going forward. Tanya's actually come up with some good examples of approaches for that, which will be promising. And then we come down to the list of appropriate economic studies that calculate the full range of economic benefits from conservation projects. And so this is something I have to admit that I revisited a few weeks ago when I took a look at this list. So we haven't exactly done an exhaustive amount of research on this, but there are some things that are out there. There are a lot of things that are out there, honestly, in this regard. Whether they're what we want is another question. Probably the one that's closest to us is the one that the Trust for Public Land did about the North Olympic Peninsula region, and value of conservation for that region. Looking through that, frankly, I don't know how useful it is. There's a lot of material there about things like preserving working lands and the value of working lands to the community, the value of tourism. There is a fair amount about property values and how having preserves increases property values, but the report itself basically cites a series of studies that have been done in that regard. And there are a lot of those out there, which show pretty clearly that having property next to a conservation area or park increases your property values. But I don't know that report, and I'm sure you all haven't had much, if any, time to take a look at it. I don't know how satisfying that is and whether that's really what we're after, whether it presents a complete enough picture or not. But on the other end of the spectrum is the McKinsey one that I threw out there, which just is an incredibly exhaustive global study of this question, really focused on climate change and the need for conservation of significant areas of the planet, frankly, to preserve biodiversity and what that means economically. So it's a huge, complicated study, frankly. But those are a couple of examples that are out there. I think that question remains, though, about whether we feel like it's important for us to do a comprehensive economic study on conservation and what its impacts are, both positive and negative on a community. So I'll just leave that for your consideration. Last one was the Communications Committee discussing a preferred approach for, quote, activating the local conservation constituency and recommending that approach to the full commission. So we spent a lot of time on the Communications Committee. I'm not sure that we've come up with this preferred approach question. I will open that, though, to other people who participated on the committee and get their feedback where we think we are in trying to address that question. Nobody?
I'd agree with Lincoln in that we have discussed a lot of things on the communication committee, but that specific topic has not been addressed. I think we've been looking at saying conservation constituency kind of pinpoints a particular group. Most of our discussions have been how to just do general outreach with the community and engage on a broad level. And in fact, I'm having a Sandy moment. I'm looking at that going, conservation constituency. Who came up with those words a year ago in February? Where did that come from? So that's all I'll say about that, is that we have met. I think we've had a lot of really great ideas, but for that particular item, I can't produce anything.
So that was our that really was the end of our action items for that. So I think we can kind of move on unless you have questions about what's happened over the previous year. I think we can proceed.
Yes. Somebody-
This is Jim. I just wanted to make a quick comment, and I think that the three areas that there are 3 or 4 areas that Lincoln touched on, and I think that with regards to tax impacts, I think we need to continue to, bear that out for people. I think it has to be one of those repeated messages that keeps on coming. And gets clarified more and more as time goes by. I think we also need to continually repeat the value of conservation and the various layers that has. And this is done through the annual report and other outreach. One suggestion I had for controversial projects is that perhaps we could, and I suppose this would take some time, but perhaps we could do some reflection on that and say, for example, the Clear project on Lopez is maybe sort of delineate the concerns that neighbors had back then, and then address those with the reality of what's happened since. And I think we could probably take that on with just about every project that's been controversial in the past to learn better from those controversies and maybe be able to be a little more proactive in the future. But we're not going to be able to do that unless we can, really reflect back on what the concerns were at the time before the preserve was opened. And then, what's happened since. And, quite frankly, the Clear project, I haven't heard a whole lot of negativity about that. I mean, none of those concerns really came to fruition. And, I think that could be true for looking at, the Brickworks controversy or Glenwood Inn as time goes by, or any of these other things that have come up over the years. But I think we need to use them and learn from them rather than just sort of file them in the files.
That's a really good point, Jim. So
Right.
suggesting that we do that as I'm not muted. Suggesting we do that as a commission or the communications committee.
I think it could go either way. It could even be handled by commissioners by island. The Lopez commissioners could take a hard look at Clear and other projects that have been controversial on Lopez, and same thing for Orcas, the same thing for San Juan. I'm not necessarily looking to put another project like this on in the lap of the stewardship staff, but I just think we need to learn from these things better than we have, and to be able to then cite them as examples, for future controversies.
Sandy, if I could.
So, Sandy, I just wanted to add something. Actually, I'll let Krista go first. You're muted, Krista.
John, I barely heard you, just so you're not coming through. I think that's kind of a good idea, because I think debriefing past things and looking at what happened and then how we resolved it would be a useful exercise, and to follow it up or close it up with the proactive as we approach projects, kind of putting out on the table or having some discussion on what the potential controversies could be on that particular project coming up before, some of it we can't anticipate, but I think we have enough experience that we should be able to look at future acquisitions or whatever to see what might be coming up, so we are a little more prepared. So proactive and reactive, but I like the idea of doing a quick review of past projects to see what came up and how we handled it, and it wasn't successful.
Thanks, Krista. John?
Can you hear me? Is this any
Yes.
better? Okay.
Yes.
I just wanted to interject that Jim's suggestion ties quite nicely, I think, to an agenda topic after lunch, in which we're asking the commissioners about any additional work beyond the development of a plan that may need to be done next year. And one idea was reaching out to adjacent property owners. So it is, what's on the agenda is a little different than what Jim is suggesting, but they could be very closely connected.
That's a good point. I'll save my comment until we get to that section then in the agenda. I'm wondering if, looking down this list of action items that Lincoln just reviewed, if there's anything that we want to remove from the action item list. I'd like to volunteer that we remove conducting quarterly public meetings, because I think that's just too quickly. You blink and a quarter has gone by. So rather than leaving an action item unattended, I'd like to hear input if others agree, and if not, then we make we cancel it out as an action item. What do others think?
Yes,
Doesn't-
cancel it out.
Okay, Brian?
Get rid of it.
Well, I'm not sure I agree, Sandy.
Okay.
The original idea goes back some time from, I think, when we were having actually live in-person meetings. And we were having the majority of them on San Juan Island. And I think the idea, and it was in part my idea, was that we should get around more. We should get more to our representative constituents. That's all changed now by the fact that we haven't been meeting in person. We've been having hybrid meetings. So I guess my suggestion is that we need to think and talk a little bit more about how to make real hybrid meetings. That is, in-person meetings that the public can attend, that we can all come together and talk together, which to me feels really important, but that we can also have the benefit of being online and getting out to everybody and anybody else who can't attend those meetings in person. So a lot of that is a tech fix. I'm not sure how to do it, but I think we need to address that.
Thank you. Mike?
Yes, Sandy, thank you. I'm wondering whether or not we should not address whether we want to continue these forward at this point, but rather go through our retreat agenda, which will develop a new list of things that we want to work on in the coming 1 to 5 years, I suspect, of which some of these may be put on that list, some of them may not be. And what I noticed about this list is it's all about communication. And the retreat is a little broader, I hope, than just communication, although communication, public relations will all be part of it. So I'm wondering if we should not go through these to see if we want to continue them, but rather fold them in after we create our action items from this retreat.
That sounds much smarter. I think I'm reacting to that. I said I'd do something that I didn't do, so I'm want to get that off the list. But you guys are all right that this is part of our bigger conversation coming. So Okay, Lincoln,
Yeah, I just got one thing. I wanted to respond to something that Jim said. Um, he brought up the dreaded word brickworks. So I figured I
Sorry.
should weigh in a little bit on that. You know, I think with that one, which we did not actually do, that was a project we attempted to do, and it did not come to fruition. And it was also quite a bit different than most of what we do. So that's the lesson for me, which is what we heard in the ensuing renewal effort and criticisms of the land bank. That project came up a lot with the question about whether the commission had actually strayed from its mission. So I think we kind of learned that lesson from that project and haven't really pushed anything along those lines of doing, I mean, the project was doing a historic preservation easement in town along with a conservation easement. And we kind of shied away from that a bit. I would say with regard to other projects and the Clure property in particular, there's one that's an easy one for us to figure out that it's going to be controversial when you're attempting to provide public access to a shoreline where you have some folks in the neighborhood who have had that access, and you're basically opening it to the public. So you know that's going to create some controversy. I will say, and I'll let Krista and Amanda weigh in on this, but I think that all of the controversy from that project is completely gone at this point. I have not heard word one or any complaints, quite frankly, about that project. Nothing other than people being extremely happy with it. So I think that's one that really worked out.
thank you. Krista, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I would just, I don't want to get caught up in working Jim's suggestion, but I think it's a good one. And I would comment on Brickworks because that happened before me, but it still comes up in conversations that I have with people about renewal, and because I have a vague understanding of something happened, but I think that's a good example of something that should be reviewed with the commission, and maybe even we keep a little primer now that we have 3 new commissioners coming on that we can kind of refer to what I don't know exactly what went wrong there, but I know PTSD was experienced by the whole commission. When I came on, you guys were still reacting to that. And so I think a little quick summary at some point in another meeting of that project would be helpful, just to have people get a broader understanding of what can happen with the community. So I would like more info on that one.
Yeah, I want to say that I think with Jim going off the commission, there would only be Lincoln currently involved with the land bank that remembers that was part of that. And that's dangerous. I mean, there's institutional memory there, but it's only one person. I don't know if there's any staff that go back that far, and there's not going to be any commissioners that go back that far. So I would probably recommend that gets rehashed so that people understand what it was about, what you know, what the risk was, what happened.
Thank
And
you.
that's not to say that there can't be, you know, if we get into this process for each of these controversial projects over the years, it's not to say that the previous commissioners can't be contacted for insight and or staff. I mean, a lot of people are still around that have that institutional memory. They're just not on the commission. Yeah. Another sort of more recent, I guess maybe minor controversy is over the water access at Zylstra. I mean, I think that's kind of died down, but that was the thing that was pretty hot for a while.
Yep. Mike, did you have your hand up again? Okay. All right, so we have an action item before really getting into the retreat. But sounds like this will get folded in later on as well. So let's remember that.
So
Okay.
I will just volunteer to take on writing a summary memo of the Brickworks project so that we can start from there at some point.
Well, and there's also different perspectives that, you know, you might want to include in writing that up because, I mean, for instance, I don't think it was straying from our mission, but a lot of people do. And so I'm sure there are other people that, you know, on both sides of that equation. So anyway, just saying.
Okay.
And I think you should write a brief history of controversial land bank projects, so that, you know, like 3 paragraphs about the 5 biggest ones or something like that, and have a conversation about that. Not much has happened since I've been on the commission. I mean, I don't know much about it in 3 years.
Well, and my goal is not to add a whole bunch of extra work involved here. I just think that it's real. My whole goal in mentioning this was to have us as a commission, both past, present, and future, learn better from these controversies, and then also be able to use you know, what the controversy was and the aftermath of the controversy in the actual operation of a preserve, or you know, observations of preserve use and that sort of thing that were complained about, that we use those things as examples to the community. You know, I again, I think of Zylstra and the kind of pushback that we had there from one particular neighbor. And, you know, I would venture to say that if, and I haven't talked to this particular neighbor recently, but I would venture to say that their experience is in having that open has been less problematic than they originally thought it would be. And these are valuable lessons for us and for us to be able to communicate to the public.
Okay, so with that, thank you, Jim, and we will get further into that. I just want to remind all participants to raise your hand and be called on before speaking, so we can keep it control, keep it orderly. I saw Mike had his hand up one more time, and then I'm turning the reins over to John after that.
Yeah, Sandy, and I took it down because I didn't think anything more needed to be more said about Brickworks.
Okay.
So it'll get addressed in the future.
All right. Okay. So we are just about at 10:05, right on track, and handing the reins to the professional who can get us on track for a productive discussion. So, John Howell, take it away.
Thank you, Sandy. Thanks earlier for the kind introduction. And it is always so nice to see you all. Some of you I see in between these retreats in the islands, but mostly seeing you at the annual retreat. All of you know I've been doing this for a number of years. It's one of the pieces of work that I look forward to the most in any given year. So thank you for inviting me back to help. For the new potential commissioners, I don't know David, haven't had the pleasure of meeting David. I've known Marilyn for a long time, and I've known Peggy even longer. So nice to see you both. Couple of things before we dive into the conversation. The custom, as most all of you know, for these retreats is that staff are invited to be conversational partners in this discussion. So as we go through this. I hope the staff, as they have in past years, will chime in. Another sort of operational detail, I think you know me well enough to know that if some of you are not speaking up on a particular topic, I may call on you just to see what your thoughts and opinions are. You are welcome to tell me you have nothing to offer, but I just want to make sure everybody has a chance to get into the conversation. Let's see, twice since I've been on, since 8:30, twice my connection has been dropped. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that will not happen, but if it does, I'll get back on as soon as I can. And lastly, if I don't see that somebody has a hand raised or in the room is waving, please, others, let me know that I've missed somebody who has a comment or a question. Okay, well, you've set the stage for a couple of our conversations today. The first one is about this question that I think Krista referenced earlier on, which is this notion of creating a strategic plan or a strategic document of some sort in advance of the potential reauthorization that would occur. And the agenda, as it always is every year, I work with Lincoln and the chair of the commission to develop the agenda. And this topic comes about because I understand there has been some discussion about wanting to create and document a strategic plan or vision for your work before a possible reauthorization. So what we wanted to talk with you about today are the set of questions listed on the agenda. What are the questions that you think a plan or vision should be focused on? What do we need to address if we're going to create a strategic document? We want to have some conversation about what the scope and extent of that strategic document should be. And there were a really helpful set of examples that Lincoln sent out. So get some feel for you for those things. Maybe pros and cons of the different approaches. When do you want this to be completed? And then what kind of public engagement do you want? So my thought is we're going to start at the top of that list and work our way down. So what I'm making an assumption that, which maybe I should double check, but I am making an assumption that you want to create a strategic document of some kind, which spells out your direction for the next 5 to 10 years. And assuming that assumption is correct, then what would you say are the key questions that effort should focus on? Krista, and please.
I don't have an answer to that question right now, but what I just for clarification for me, in reading this, we use the term vision statement and strategic plan, and it comes up, I think a couple times, but I'm uncomfortable using those interchangeably because to me, a vision statement, if it's a vision plan, then it's kind of semantics, but a vision statement to me is it's a statement, and a strategic plan is much different. So just so I know where we're going, I'd like to separate those two and not use them with a slash in between like they're the same thing. It's confusing to me.
Yep, fair enough. Let me ask, while you have the floor, Krista, what's your sense of which, if that's sort of a fork in the road, creating a vision statement versus a more comprehensive strategic plan, what's your sense of the work to be done in this realm?
I would support a vision statement within a strategic plan. And I'm interested in pursuing a strategic plan. Like that's what I would like to do. And so I'll leave it at that and then we can.
I'm not sure what order everyone put their hands up, but I see Miles, Brian, Lincoln, and Mike. So Miles, I'll go with you first.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, John, for being here again. I think having a strategic plan without a vision statement will be difficult. The vision statement to me, I don't really know. I'm not familiar with these terms, so I looked them up, which are mainly the definitions are provided through businesses and corporations. They seem to have that be an important part of their structure. For me, a vision would be tackling what the problems are that the land bank is dealing with in the next 5 to 10 years, whether those are its own organization, if we're talking about inclusiveness and diversity for the organization, or if we're talking about what we're trying to achieve, if it's combating climate crisis or increasing biodiversity in the islands, whatever that vision is for the next 5 to 10 years. And then to me, the strategic plan will be how we're proposing to solve those problems. So I think you have to have both of those documents together, and I agree with Krista that they're not interchangeable. But I think it would be difficult to pursue a strategic plan without a vision statement first.
And your sense, Miles, is that both should be pursued.
Yes, I think they're a good partner.
Brian, I know I said you were next, but Lincoln, I want to call on you next because I'm not trying to throw you under the bus, but I think this notion of a vision document came from some of the conversations that you and Sandy and I had, and you were asking this question. So maybe you could articulate a little bit about what you think the difference might be in the two approaches, if there is a difference.
Yeah, I don't want to get caught up in semantics. The reason I came up with the two phrases was because there are two different approaches, really clearly different approaches in those examples that I gave you with the government programs, the King County program and the Boulder, Colorado program, really having basically a list, which is their statement of what their objectives are without necessarily having this underlying strategic plan. So they've articulated those goals, and that's what you see when you're looking at their program for what's important to them. There's not a long analysis behind those things, what you'd expect with a strategic plan. There's not an organizational component necessarily to it. It's really more about the objectives of what they're hoping to accomplish. So that's why I came up with those two things.
Thank you. That's helpful. That was when I reviewed all those documents, that was my take as well, that the Boulder, King County documents, higher level mission, vision, goal statements, strategies, but
Uh-oh.
Bye, John.
Raise your hand if you love technology.
Bye, John.
all right. Brian?
I think you called me, John.
Yes,
I
you did.
just, yeah. I raised my hand because I would agree with Krista and Miles that vision statement and a strategic plan are two entirely different things. And the statement actually caused me to go back to our website and look at the vision statement that's on our website. We really need a new one. It's not a vision statement. It's rambling. It's diffuse. A vision statement really should be first and foremost about focus and expand on our mission and talk about what our mission will bring us, our vision for the future. And it should be a sentence or two, period. I'm personally ambivalent about doing a strategic plan, and because it's a big deal. It's a lot of energy. I think we're doing very well. So the question I would ask is why? What's new? What are there things that are changes that we might need to figure out and focus on and address? And that's really a question.
Thank you, Brian. Mike, and then Sandy, and then Aaron.
Right. The terms are confusing. When I use these terms, and I have for decades, a vision is something where you close your eyes and you take yourself out 10 years and you look back and you say, this is our land bank today. So it's the vision of what we want it to be over a long period of time. The mission and the vision kind of overlap. They're difficult to distinguish between. I'm not sure you need both. The strategic plan is what guides your actions. So in order to achieve this vision, I create a strategic plan. That strategic plan says, here's the things we've got to do over this next 5 years, say, to move the ball forward towards our vision. And behind all that are tactics, which are, what are we going to do in 2023 to move that ball forward again? So these are real action items with names of responsibilities, due dates, etc. I mean, they're really activities. This organization has other things. It has a mandate, which is published. It has a purpose, which is 2.120 of the county laws, which says the purpose of the Citizens Conservation Land Bank is to, and it goes through that. We need to, if we're going to create clarity around what people think of us and the expectations they have for us, we need to have clarity. We can't fog it up with lots of different kinds of statements, grand statements, or even tactical statements. So I think we need to address what do we need, what don't we need, because it's covered someplace else, and then we can move forward. Now, I would also say, you're not going to do this in 3 or 4 hours. These plans, if we really want something that we're going to live by and be accountable for, they take, and John will tell you, I mean, these are weekends at least. So anyway, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Mike. And I would say doing this work is a lot more than weekend work. It's a big undertaking. Sandy? You're on mute, Sandy.
So I too agree in terms of that a vision statement is something nested within a larger plan. I personally don't think a vision statement without a plan that says how you're going to fulfill it is worthy of pursuing. 2 comments. this goes to what Brian said about, he's ambivalent about whether or not we need a plan because it takes a lot of resources and we're doing a good job. And I see this as a checking in with the public, that basically what is the public vision? And then the commissioners are here to represent the public. So to me, it would be a significant public outreach effort. There was, I guess, back in 1990, and then there have been a few surveys that maybe weren't specific to the land bank, and the public has changed and priorities have changed. And so I see this as an opportunity to check in with the public, the voting public, to find out what their vision is of the land bank in terms of priorities, because we can't do every single thing. And then the last little comment is I also noticed the two government websites just having their overall goals, but I suspect that behind those goals is an actual plan that's not shared on that website, and which is something that that I think should be able to be downloadable to the public. So anyways, those are my comments.
Thanks, Sandy. Aaron, then David, and then Krista.
Hi, this is Jim.
Oh,
Aaron,
sorry.
Aaron was my proxy. He was
Okay.
holding up the hand for me here in the room.
Thanks, Jim.
I think in this discussion, we're not really addressing the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is that we are going to be up for renewal in 2024. And and that's going to be when the community tells us what they want. If they want us to keep doing what we're doing, then we'll know. And I think, if we do a strategic plan now, we're going to need to do another one in 2025 if we get renewed. But I think we really need to go after this by doing two things. One is giving the public, for the renewal effort, so to speak, giving the public an idea of what we want to do and how we want to do it going forward as a basis for arguing for renewal. I also think we owe it to the public, and this is something that doesn't show up in any of those links to other land trusts, because they're structured differently. But we need to be able to tell the public what we're going to do if we don't get renewed. And there needs to be an understanding there and what the ramifications are there. I think these are the two efforts we need to embark upon here for 2023 and 2024, knowing that we're going to get instruction, so to speak, from the public in November of 2024. I understand fully, John, that we have this alternative analysis here after lunch. And I think that what I'm trying to say is that is very important in the process that we're undertaking now. It's not something that we can look at a whole lot of examples of, because I think the land bank is in a unique position amongst land conservation and preservation organizations, in that we are mandated by the public every 12 years. And this isn't it's potentially not a long-term thing. And strategic planning should be for long-term. These are just the things that I think that we owe the community. and then revisit this process in 2025, hopefully after renewal.
Thanks, Jim. The second piece of your comment, as you noted, we are going to talk about this afternoon. We are going to talk about what kind of analysis, if any, you all would want done about a scenario in which renewal is not successful. So that will be discussed this afternoon. Let's see, David, Krista, Miles, Lincoln.
Yeah, I want to just kind of echo what Jim is saying. I think that everything has to be about renewal in the next couple of years. I think that the land bank is pretty much under an existential threat. Voters did not approve a road fund levy. Voters did not approve the San Juan Island Library. I think that people are really looking at housing affordability as the significant pain point in this community, and it's going to be tough to convince voters to reauthorize. I don't think it's impossible. I think it's likely to happen, but it has to be 100% of the focus right now.
And so, David, what does that suggest to you about this issue that's on the table about, do we do a plan? Do we not do a plan? What's the scope of that plan? Given the focus on the renewal, what do you think the work is to prepare for the renewal with regard to this question of creating a plan?
That's a really hard question. I mean, we've worked hard to try to engage the community in conversation. I think we have not succeeded in that. I mean, I felt really disappointed with the community conversations and the fact that people don't show up to talk to us about what's going on. I think that we should move very quickly back to having public meetings. This hybrid meeting format that we're in right now is really problematic. I mean, in theory, a bunch of the public could cram in here in this room where I am, and there's 4 or 5 other people in here. We're not inviting people to talk to us at our meetings now. I don't know. I'm stumped, honestly, John. I wish I had an answer. I want it to be easier to extract opinions and suggestions from the public. It's not easy. I think it may be the only venue that really works is one-on-one with commissioners and staff talking to people individually. But we're facing a couple of things. One is probably there's 3. The economy is tough for people. There's been inflation, and just in general, and housing affordability is really low. So people are reticent to approve anything that's a tax or an added cost. I think there's another angle, which I'm not sure if this is the right time to bring it up, but there's a level of skepticism out there about what happens if the land bank continues on its path. Are we creating a situation where there's a greater and greater level of financial responsibility to steward preserves, and how does that get addressed? I mean, what happens 5 to 10 years down the road if we've bought another 3 Glenwoods and another 2 Higgins and another Mount Grant or something like that? What's the end game? And I think, frankly, some of the people most concerned about that angle are people in high positions in county government. And those folks are looking at this and going, how does this end? How does this work out? We're not talking about that question, and we need to be. And we need to be engaging them on that question. So there is some very challenging and very important communication stuff to do here, and I'm the wrong person to ask about exactly how to do it.
Thanks, David. Krista, Miles, and then Lincoln. And Sandy, do you have your hand up again? Okay, Krista?
I got pretty excited right there. So I will say, number one, I disagree with Jim, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to disagree with him one more time before the end of the year. But I disagree on waiting to leave to learning what the public wants by their vote, to vote us down or up. I think we can learn about what the community wants before then, so that we could possibly impact what they want in November of 24. So I think waiting to hear what they want is not active enough for me. I think a strategic plan isn't all that long-term, 5 to 10 years. We're a 12-year cycle. I think a strategic plan kind of works really well for us. And I would go into this process assuming we are going to be renewed with the optimism. That is our vision, as Mike said. And I think quickly just addressing David's, what is the end game? I think that's part of this strategic process. If I envision going forward, if we go forward with the strategic plan, it seems to me that our habitat conservation plan, which I think we've talked about renewing, will provide or should provide a lot of the environmental habitat data that you would be collecting for a strategic plan. So I think that work needs to happen and could support the strategic planning process. I think we should and would include community goals, community input for the strategic plan. And Lincoln's talked about a survey. I think I just finished a strategic plan with the hospital district, and we did a survey. And from that survey, we invited focus groups to really dig deep into some of the questions that we proposed to them. Those questions were medical, but our survey would be asking different questions, but then following up with focus groups, we could find out what that means so we know how to react and how we should be moving forward with what the community wants. And then the question of finances, I see the strategic plan is looking at our sustainability goals too, which means how are we going to, that addresses the plan B option. We should be talking about that in a strategic plan. What is plan B if there is no renewal, etc. So I think all these concerns people are putting out, that we have these things to work on. And to me, the strategic plan could provide a disciplined framework that we actually move forward on each of these areas. So that's why I support this plan. I think all these ideas are really important, but they've been important for a while. And I think going through a disciplined process where we actually get the work done over a certain timeline would help us.
Thanks, Krista. I know Miles and Lincoln, you're queued up next, but if I could, I want to go back, Jim, to what you said in Krista's opening that she wants to disagree with you. I was hearing you say, Jim, that you think before renewal, what I wrote down is we need to focus on what we want to do and how we want to do it. And then once there is renewal, then you think there needs to be a revisiting of the plan after renewal. But am I correct that you're also thinking there needs to be work in advance of renewal about this? What do we want to do and how do we want to do it?
Absolutely. I mean, we need to give some vision to the public for them to cogitate on and decide how they want to vote. The question is, in my mind, if we're looking at doing a strategic plan now, should that be a long-term strategic plan or a shorter-term strategic plan, which then the answer to that question determines the complexity of the planning process. And I think we need to outline to the public. Well, first of all, we don't want to have the public misunderstand a strategic planning process. We want the public to understand that we're being nimble and we're thinking about the future. However, we also need to be realistic to the public and let the public know that we are not living in the clouds, and that they need to understand if they want to understand. And that's also the big question is, how engaged is the public right now? I don't know, but conservation seems to be higher on the list now than it was back in our last renewal. But really, it's kind of showing the public that we're being thoughtful and nimble at the same time, and that we understand the realities of life in the islands, and that we want to address these concerns that people have about property taxes and how much is enough, and what is the end game, and all those sorts of questions. I just think we need to use the time frame here over the next 4 years or 3 years to frame our discussions. And I think if we just look at a long-term strategic plan, we're not fully engaging the realities of life that of our situation.
Thanks, Jim. I just wanted to point out, Krista, that I'm not sure, but Jim is raising a question about scale of work between now and renewal, but I'm not sure that you actually disagree that there is some work that needs to be done. And we're in the process of trying to scope out how broad, how narrow that work is. But so far, I'm hearing most everybody say there is work to be done before renewal that gets at this, what do we want to do and how do we want to do it? And then some of you have a little bit more expansive notion. But before I try and do any summary, let's keep going with those who want to comment. Miles, Lincoln, and then David.
Yeah, so I'll say two things. One is that for the renewal question, which to me, renewal is a problem that we're facing. I would not say that one of our visions should be successful renewal. That's not really a vision that fits with our mandate. Our mandate is to have a community, serve a community, and acquire properties that have different values like historical, ecological value. So for me, if I was going to say what the problem was in the vision statement to address that, it would be more about saying something like we're an irreplaceable connection to nature for islanders with strong community support and involvement. If we succeed in that in the next 5 years, then that's sort of what would be a good reason for people to support us in renewal. So I think that we don't need to have it mentioned directly in the vision statement, but that the strategic plan would then outline specifically how we're going to achieve that, which would involve communicating in some of the ways that Jim's talking about, that would lead towards more awareness about what we do and appreciation for what we do. So I think that's again why having a vision is really short, concise, and talking about where we want to be in the next 5 years, and the strategic plan puts it into action. I'll also say that we do have community involvement already. We did the Polis community discussion that was finalized in October 2021. So a little over a year ago. We know what people are thinking about the land bank. It wasn't that long ago. The community hasn't changed that much. All of us as commissioners have talked to people in our local jurisdictions. We have a good sense, hopefully, for what people are looking for in the islands. I think that the vision statement really should be defined by leadership. I don't think that the vision statement, which is going to be concise and simple, needs to have a discussion from the community at that level. I think a strategic plan about how we put into place could involve that. And in fact, in the vision statement, maybe having more community engagement might be one of the things that we as the leaders decide that we want to include. And then we pursue that in the strategic plan by getting more feedback. But I don't think the vision statement itself needs to have a lot of comment from the public. I think it's meant to be done by leadership.
Thank you, Miles. Lincoln, David, Krista, Doug.
Yeah, I just had something brief when Jim was talking about looking at alternatives. It brought to mind the fact that there are other planning approaches out there as well. When the federal government in particular is looking at a park or some kind of conservation area, and they are doing a management plan, typically they'll do an alternatives analysis, and that's really kind of the meat of the plan. It's like, this is alternative one is we're going to do X, alternative two is we're going to do Y, and so you could have a plan where, you're assuming that the land bank is reauthorized. And if that's the case, then, this is where we hope to go. And another alternative is, well, if it's not, then this is what we're proposing as a direction. So just throwing that out there.
But that the first alternative, Lincoln, the where we're proposing to go, and that requires some degree of strategic thinking. I won't use the term strategic plan, but sort of back to the what do we want to do and how do we want to do it? Is that when you say sort of where do we want to go? Is that what that means to you?
Yeah, I think so. My main point here is that we've been conceiving of these things as two separate items.
I see.
So they don't necessarily have to be two separate items. They could be part of a whole.
Got it. Thank you. David?
Yeah, I mean, without using the terms vision statement or strategic plan, I guess I want to say that there has to be some explanation ready for the public prior to reauthorization that explains what we're going to do in the next cycle, what we're planning to do. Is it going to be continue the course that we've been on? Is it going to be adjust that somehow? There has to be some level of planning done now or soon as part of advocating for reauthorization. I guess I'm having a hard time thinking, okay, vision statement, is that a useful thing? I don't know. Maybe it is. Strategic plan, yes, probably. That's an easier fit for my brain. But the commission and the staff have to come up with an elevator speech worth of a summary of what is going to happen in the next cycle. And it's a given that we want to be reauthorized. I agree that Plan B ought to be talked about as well, but I would certainly try to get reauthorized. So,
Thank you. Krista?
So I think there's, Jim, you seem to be struggling with, or maybe this whole long term, that this strategic plan is too long term, but I would again disagree. I think having a strategic plan that does look forward over a period of time, say 10 years, the length of the plan and the goals and the objectives and the tactics might roll out over a 10-year period, but that doesn't mean you can't have short-term goals within, that's what starts the plan. And so I think the issue of working with the community, either finding out what they want or telling them what we're doing, those are all short-term goals. I think if we put the time in to discuss these different strategic elements, and it's done within 2023, or it's started and some of the feedback is coming in, the committee that works on renewal has to have information to take to the public to explain their case on why the land bank should be renewed. And I think some of the material, the objective factual data, can be generated through the strategic plan, and then they can take that and put the vote yes title on it. But we are not really giving that committee, we need to give that committee some hard data, and that means our conservation plan, whatever that, if we update that, that gives a lot of our environmental and habitat goals. And then if we work with plugging into the community and in a broader standpoint, public meetings don't work. I think we really need to come up with a tactic on how to reach out to more people and get feedback that we can respond to, not just tell them what we're doing, but ask them what they want us to do. But some of that stuff can be gathered this year and then used by the renewal committee to support a yes vote. But that's how I see these working together in a short-term thing.
Krista, I'm curious about your reaction to Miles' comment that there's been polling in the past, there's been survey work that's done in the past. We know what the public wants. You, Sandy, maybe somebody else talked about your notion of this, developing this plan would include some community outreach. Can you speak to sort of your thoughts about work that's been done in the past versus why you think you would need to do additional work now?
I think those past, the polis did provide us with some good information, but I think community responds to engagement. And I can speak for Lopez. They want to be part of the process. And if you're coming up next year in 2024 and asking for renewal, providing the opportunity in 2023 to have people renew their outlook, their feelings about the land bank, and share that with the commission and feel like it's actually being taken in as part of your strategic plan, I think that goes a long way to getting people to understand and to want to support what we're doing. So I think something current. I don't even know if people remember what they addressed in those, in the polis survey. It was long enough ago for me. I remember the general gist of a lot of stuff, but I just think having current public engagement is a more authentic way to contribute to the, a long-term plan.
Thanks, Sandy. Doug? I said Sandy, I meant Krista, sorry. Doug?
Yeah, I see that Sandy maybe had her hand up before me, so I don't know if Sandy wanted to go first. No. Yeah, I think I might be just echoing what a lot of people have, and this is kind of a fun semantics kind of wrestling match we're having. And just a couple of thoughts, I guess I would add. And it's almost sort of funny saying this, since I'm very supportive of us moving the direction of a strategic plan, but I do question about the timing of it a little bit if we were to go that direction now, because it is a tremendous amount of effort and work that goes into that. And I guess the two parts of it is that if we go into a renewal and there's that effort where we're getting a lot of feedback and that changes that plan, is that a valuable use of that time and energy going into this short period in front of us? The Preservation Trust, I think, their strategic planning process they went through took close to 2 years, if I remember correctly. Not that we would necessarily follow the same format. And then the other thing I think that is the potential is that if you're in the middle of kind of this questioning about your sort of identity and what you want to be, that process, it's a risk. I think that going into the renewal effort, I guess I would have a little bit more of a tendency of wanting to kind of really ride on our accomplishments and set forth a vision, but not so much be saying, gosh, we're not sure, who we are and what we want to be. What do you think? That seems to be a little bit more of a tricky messaging to put yourself in ahead of that effort. So I think just to summarize that, if we're really looking at this as a primary motivator being the renewal effort rather than just the general desire to have a vision statement and/or strategic plan, then I would think we would look really closely at that question of why we want it and address those things for that short term. And then if we are looking for the strategic plan for its value in and of itself, think about the timing and what we'd want to get out of that when, and the timing and subject matter.
So Doug, just to make sure I'm clear, I understood your point about the time it would take to do a thorough strategic plan. I hear that point, but if you think that should be done after renewal, what is it you think should be done leading up to renewal?
One is definitely highlighting our accomplishments and figuring out a way to summarize those and celebrate them. get a lot of support on those, because it's really a phenomenal track record of what we've done across a whole lot of sectors, and we touch people's lives every single day in this county. You know, whether they're aware of that or not, you know, it's a huge impact on people's lives here. So that's one thing I think is that summary of accomplishments in some sort of format and communicating that. And then the second is, I think, that vision statement, and it's sort of like, here's our vision for the next generation. Like, you know, we're going into Land Bank 4.0 and in this renewal effort. Here's the big topical areas that we think that there's really important work that we still need to do. And, you know, I could summarize some of those off the top of my head right now, but I think it'd be much better work for, you know, figuring out a way. I liked what was said about, I think David mentioned it, making it into elevator speech, making these things so that they're digestible and easy for people to understand, which is admittedly challenging with the diversity of what we do.
Thanks,
Does that
Doug.
help?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Let's see, Sandy, sometimes I see your hand up and then down, so I'm sorry, I'm not sure. Oh, yeah.
I keep trying to do the, you know, the icon, and I don't see it coming on. If it looks like it's flying on and off, it's because I can't see it. So then I say, forget it, and I raise my hand. Just a couple of comments. So I think there's more commonality in all of these comments than differences. There's sort of just nuances on how to, different ideas on how to approach this. So I think that's positive. I wanted to comment, or at least bring up, so Krista had brought this up before, and that is the legality of using staff resources for I don't know if it would be considered a political, you know, for a political renewal vote. And I just wanted to clarify that even if there was no renewal vote, I think that this is exactly what the land bank should be doing. It would be great if there had already been one and we were just now in a tweaking mode, like let's update the plan. But since there hasn't been one, it definitely feels like it's time. So I think it's important to separate the fact that we are doing a strategic plan, and it will be a tool for a citizen-led renewal committee to use. However, it's still important. It's still an important tool for the organization. And part of that has to do with having reviewed some of these other plans, acting in a more strategic manner versus opportunistic manner. And many of the maps that Lincoln has shown us before can be folded in. A lot of this work has been done in fragmented ways. And not to say that this wouldn't be a large effort, but I think we have a lot of the components to begin the framework of a plan. Then the last thing I wanted to mention is each organization should have their own plan, and at the same time, I wonder, as being Lincoln's participation in the Terrestrial Managers Group and our partners, the Preservation Trust, doing their plan and other places doing their plan, and I still wonder if there isn't a way to have an overall conservation plan for San Juan County in which we plug into. So that, I don't think we're going to answer that question today. It's just something that comes comes to mind. That's all.
Thanks, Andy. There's a couple more people who want to speak on this. We're coming up on our 11 o'clock break, and then according to the agenda, we are supposed to shift gears. My sense is if we stick to an 11 o'clock break, we ought to keep talking about this, because I think Sandy's right that there is some commonality, but there are also some pretty big differences in terms of what several of you have said you think the approach is. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but my sense is it's worth spending some more time talking about this. And I just want to get a sense others feel the same way about it.
Yes.
Okay. So we have a couple minutes before a break. Aaron, are you putting your hand up for Jim again?
Yeah, he is. My whole question in this process is again timing, and I want to echo what Doug McCutcheon said, in that if we are going to be querying the public for what they want in the coming year, should we really be putting the effort into a strategic plan now, rather than after we understand better what the public wants? So it's a fundamental question about timing.
I'm pausing because I want to make sure that's sunk in. So is your comment that you don't think that public engagement, public outreach should occur before the renewal?
No, I think the public outreach to query the public as to what they want is critical to us going forward and planning for the future. The question is timing of spending a whole lot of effort strategic planning now, because we maybe arrogantly think we know what the public wants. I don't know. I mean, I think what the public wants changes over time, and if we're going to be putting in the effort to find out what they want now, in the next year, really is it worth spending a great amount of time on a long-term strategic plan rather than perhaps not directly planning for renewal, although because we don't want to expend public assets on something like that, but this is the commission full of volunteers that's discussing this, and I think that we need to be thinking about what we want to do, how we want to do it going forward, but when is the best time to do that? Before or after renewal? Before or after we have checked in with the public again? I'm just throwing this out, thinking out loud here, because we're talking about putting a lot of effort into a strategic plan, and when should that be best taken on?
Got it. I will say, as I went through the documents that Lincoln sent out, most of the organizations that developed a plan talked about not developing a plan in isolation of community engagement, but talked about how they folded in community engagement and how that engagement affected their plan, their results. So
right.
They were part and parcel with one another.
So in essence, that would be, to summarize, getting the public involved in us creating our strategic plan.
Right, which I think is what I was hearing Krista and Sandy and maybe someone else suggesting. Okay, we are at 11 o'clock. In the queue was Krista, Mike, and David. And why don't we take our break and we'll come back and keep this conversation going? Because I think we need a little more resolution than we have at the moment.
I will say that, John, you're doing a great job of working through this, and I think we have addressed or are addressing all of the discussion questions sort of in a big lump.
We are.
And that's okay. We are addressing all these elements, and so and then even the discussion about aspirational goals for the land bank for the next 5 to 10 years also folds into our discussion, as well as the activities for after lunch. So this is sort of the overall theme, it seems to me right now.
So let's take a break. What did we say? This is a 10-minute break. So come back at 11:10 and keep the conversation going. I've got Krista, Mike, and David next in the queue. All righty. Let's see, everyone's back but Lincoln. Anybody know if Lincoln is, oh, there he is. Thanks. Okay, there were a couple of others who wanted to get in before the break into the conversation, so let me call on them. And then I was reflecting during the break on what I think I'm hearing as to where you have some common agreement and where you may not. I want to sort of play that back to you, but would also ask you all to be thinking the same thing. You've heard the same conversation I have. So to the extent you think you've got thoughts about where there is commonality, if I don't express it in a way that's consistent with your thinking, like others to chime in. So Krista, Mike, and David.
Okay, so I guess what I am feeling is that there is some discomfort or hesitation on investing in the development of a plan, which would include goals and objectives and tactics that may change or be influenced by something. Sounds like mainly public input, so fair enough. So I guess I wonder about the usefulness of letting go of the concept of a plan, but focusing on review and update of the habitat conservation plan, if that in fact is a useful tool to the land bank in developing strategies over the next time period. Is it read here? It was introduced to follow 6 years ecologically based land protection efforts for the next 6 years. So it sounds like it does have some value. So, and it, you know, it was developed in 2008. So maybe now we should review and update that plan. We could look at separately community input, not so much getting output to the community, but actually spending some time this year getting some input from the community on, do they hear about us? How do they hear about us? Why don't they hear about us? And if they do hear about us, what do they think? And then a third component would be spending time looking at the Plan B scenario now, in the off chance that we are not renewed. We could put some thought and some time into that. So if we look at three components, the conservation plan, community input, and Plan B, those could be worked on. And any information coming out of that is going to be helpful to any renewal effort in terms of communicating to the public what the land bank is currently doing. And it doesn't have us spend a bunch of time on objectives and goals and measurables and things like that. That can be done whenever someone wants it done. I guess after renewal, it sounds like, is the benchmark that people are not wanting to spend too much time until we find out whether we're actually renewed. So I'm just going to throw that out there and kind of looking at the components that would be used in a strategic plan, doing those this year, and then finalizing and developing the goals and things in 2 years. I don't have a timeline for that. I'm just trying to move beyond getting hung up on feeling that the strategic plan is not a good use of our time in the short term until we find out whether we've been voted in or not.
Thanks, Krista. I was hearing something a little bit different, but I'll describe that in a moment. Mike?
Thanks. I'm not so sure that we should go into the next 2 or 3 years without some goals and objectives. I think it's part of what we want to communicate, whether we're up for renewal or not, to the public who voted us a mandate and is giving us the REAP. And I think having a strategic some strategic objectives, measurable or not, at this point, is kind of important. I think the question that I've got about is the vision. I'm not sure we need the vision at this point. If we're going to spend time trying to get a vision, when we have a mandate, which is like a mission, it says what we're supposed to do. It was voted in by the people, and it's what this whole thing is based on. Underneath the mandate or mission, I would call it, are some of the strategies. So, for example, what is our strategy over the next 2 or 3 years with respect to easements versus purchases? And REITs are going down. The last 5 months, we averaged $4.2 million in REIT money on an annualized basis. That's way below what last year was and the year before. So we're entering into a softer real estate market. Does that mean we focus on easements and stewardship? And should that be part of our strategy that we talk about? So people know this is where the money is going. This is how we adapt to changing economic times. Frugality. I think people are worried about the economy, and where does frugality play? So how does what we do affect somebody's pocketbook? And I think was brought up about the taxes, the property taxes. And I don't know that I know I've heard Lincoln's comments at these community sessions on how the REIT is not really affecting the normal citizen very much, their property tax. I think we need to show that, and we need to be more proofful. I'll tell you, all I know is my property taxes went up a bunch last year and the year before. So that's what I know. So do I know that the land bank is part of that or not part of that? I think we have it. So the reason I think we should go ahead, Jim, and there's some degree here between, I think, what you're talking about, what I'm talking about, is I think we need to have a basis for communication. And I think having strategic objectives and plans is a basis for communication, what we're doing. And we need to have that anyway, whether we're up for election or not. So that was what I was thinking as we go forward. We start with this mandate, so we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, and then we start talking about more strategic or tactical things that are going to help us set our priorities. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Sorry, I dropped off there for a minute, but I think I got what you said with your summary just now.
Well, I tried to go on and on so you would come back.
Let's see. Probably Jim, and then Mike, Thomas, and then Peter.
Hey, John, I'd put my hand down just so I wouldn't forget to put it down, but I do have a couple things to say, and they're totally unrelated. The first one is we've talked a little bit about how staff time, staff efforts have to be kept out of a political campaign, and I think it's important that the land bank has the county attorney come in and give a little spiel on that and how that needs to work, and that should happen pretty soon because we've started talking about this in commission meetings the last 2 or 3 months, and so I think those lines ought to be clearly drawn by John Kane or whoever. And then my other thing is, like I said, totally unrelated. I'm thinking about whether you go out and ask the public what they want, or you have a vision for what the county should look like and you present that. And I struggle with that. I tend toward the latter. I tend to feel like I think we all know what needs to happen, and we should present that as that's our pitch. We're going on the ballot with it. I think it would be really hard to go out and elicit enough meaningful input from the community to formulate the ballot initiative. I don't see that. I think that it's going the other way. And I guess I think Doug McCutcheon said that too. Thanks.
Okay. So Aaron, was your hand up for David or for Jim?
It was Jim.
Okay, go ahead, Jim. And then Mike, Thomas, Peter, and Sandy.
A quick clarification. I am not by any means saying we should not do any planning now. But I think what we need to do is plan for a plan. We need to plan for going forward, and we need to plan for the possibility of not going forward. I think that's our fiduciary responsibility to plan for both of those outcomes. And so if we could come up with some sort of use this process as sort of coming up with a structure for a plan with some substance to it, but leaving it open for public engagement through the renewal process and afterwards. And I think it's in terms of us talking about renewal. I think that it's important for us as a commission, and commissioners it's okay for commissioners to talk about renewal because we are not paid. It's a question of, and Mike Thomas might want to clarify some of this too, but it's the staff involvement and using staff time that becomes problematic. So in my mind, and I'm an outgoing commissioner, but I have to say that if I wasn't leaving commission in a few weeks, I would still be saying these things in terms of planning for the future. And in terms of us considering renewal, I think we would be remiss if we weren't talking about it in terms of the health of this organization and what we want to do going forward. So just wanted to clarify that, and wanted to clarify the fact that I'm not talking about not planning. I'm just talking about how we structure the planning.
Thank you. Mike Thomas? Mike, are you there?
I had myself on mute.
Oh.
Classic blunder. Thank you. Yeah, what I was saying, but that you couldn't hear, but I'll repeat myself. I agree almost entirely with what Mike said. I think that you do need, and you do have the time to do a strategic plan. I think you already have a lot of information that can get packaged into that. It's a piece of information that you guys can point to when you go to the voters and say, hey, here's who we are, here's what we're doing, here's what we're going to do, and here's how we're going to do it. You need something to point to, because the voters are familiar with what the land bank has done, but they are more interested in what the land bank's going to do. So when we put together the other levy measures like that, we did a couple of general fund levies, we did the road levy, we talk about things prospectively. What are we going to do when we get your money? Should you give us your money? Here are the things we're going to do and how to do it. And I think you absolutely need that strategic document to point to. I think that you have time and you have the information. I just think if you go to the voters now and go, look what we've done, then they're going to be great. That doesn't give anyone a picture of what's going to happen in the future. And and that's really what you're asking people to do. If you give us, will you give us your money? And if you give us your money, here's what we're going to do. And if you don't have that clarity, then I don't think it's going to go that well.
Hey, Mike, if I could maybe put you on the spot just a bit. I'm curious what your reaction is to this question that we've talked about here in the last hour about public engagement. And so I clearly understand your concept of it is time to do a plan before the renewal, but what's your sense about the engagement question that's been discussed?
I think engagement and how you go about that is a larger discussion, but you have to make a connection with the voters, with the citizens, and in getting that information, I think it's vital because that information is going to tell you, are you tracking in the right direction? Is there a misconception? whether it could be taxation or how acquisitions are done. It's going to give you the information you need to tailor your plan and to respond to information that's either negative or just wrong. So I can't imagine moving forward without a very healthy public engagement component on this effort.
Thanks, Mike. Peter, Sandy, David, Miles, and then let me draw a line at Miles because I want to put something on the table here about just where I think there's some commonality. So,
John,
and yeah,
before we go on, I was just gonna see, I don't know, has Mike disappeared? I can't see him anymore.
I see his name on the screen, but he's muted there. Now he's unmuted, so he's there.
I was hoping to
I'm
get.
unmuted.
Okay, thank you. I was just gonna throw that question to you about what staff
Oh,
can do.
staff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I can. I'm happy to answer that. And if you want to bring the PA in, I think that's great. That creates a comfort level that I think some of you need. Really, what the rule of thumb is that staff can do a lot of work, and we can produce a lot of what I call FAQs. What we can't do is advocate for the vote. We can't put out information that says vote for land bank renewal. What you can do is put out FAQs about the renewal, whether that's the money part, the program part, the people part, so people can understand that basic information. So you're going to rely on your staff to develop all of that. You just can't run a campaign where you're telling people how to vote, putting up signs, radio advertisements. You can't do that proactive part. You can't get on the phone and call people, but you can use your staff time to develop all of the materials needed to what I call, putting together FAQs. And we've done that for the road levy, which unfortunately didn't pass, but we spent an enormous amount of staff time developing the numbers. You may recall that we put out a postcard that had facts on it. So as long as we're sticking to the facts and articulating what the measure is, then we're fine. We just can't take that next step where we are perceived as telling people how they should vote on the measure.
So maybe I'm stating the obvious here, Mike, but for the commissioners and for the staff to work on some variety of a strategic plan. Here's what we've done, here's what we want to do, and here's how we're going to do it. That falls into the factual bucket. That's perfectly okay.
Yeah, exactly. That is totally fine. It's the next step where you would take that and turn it into a campaign piece. But no, that's totally fine to spend your commission's time and staff time developing that document. Because you would arguably do that with or without the election.
Yeah, as several commissioners have said, from their perspective, this is work that needs to be done. Okay, thank you very much, Mike.
Sure.
Peter, Sandy, David, Miles.
So although I'm not interested in producing a giant dusty tome, I do think as a voter, I'd be much more likely to support an organization with a plan. So I think I'm just saying what others have already said. I don't think it needs to be exhaustive, but I think the broad vision and the key goals need to be there, much like they are on some of the sample websites that Lincoln provided. I mean, in some cases, there's a long PDF associated with those, but not in every case. I think for the land bank, most of the goals are largely in place and just simply need to be articulated and presented succinctly for the public, to review and vote on. So I think the specific objectives and the accomplishments that can be added, reviewed by the commission, and then updated annually to show, accountability. But I think we do need to get something out there for the renewal vote. Thanks.
Hey, Peter, if I could ask you a question. I forget if it was Sandy or Krista who said there's work that's already been done that could be folded into a strategic plan, sort of the documentation of it, the appendices of it. Is that your sense as well, or to what extent, when you think about a plan that you have in mind, is there new work to do on landscape analysis, conservation planning? You'd speak a little bit to that?
I do think there's work to be done specifically around cataloging the landscape, basically, mapping and showing what it is that the land bank owns, because I think people want to protect what they know. And, we're talking with folks about some mapping, and we're doing it internally gradually. But I think an effort to really show the public and describe what it is that we currently own and what we're protecting, I think is important. But I think in terms of goals, the land bank's broad goals, I think those are already articulated in a number of places. And, it's an exercise in compiling and reviewing and wordsmithing to me, but I'll be interested in hearing from others on that.
Thanks, Peter. Sandy?
If I can try to say something different so we're not all repeating the same thing. I'm hearing that the consensus is doing a plan. It's time to work on a plan, and that I'll let you summarize it afterwards, John, but I'm moving in a direction that we're doing a plan. And I'm would like to, maybe we can at least check off some of the questions here on timing for a plan, which of these, if any of these models were a good model to follow that Lincoln provided, and what do we think public engagement should look like? I want to first thank Mike Thomas for weighing in. I think that is very helpful to hear, to reinforce that that we should be doing a plan and that we can be doing a plan. So thank you for that. Let's see. I personally would like us to make a goal of having a plan done by the end of December, by December 2023. And I think that can include the public outreach component. And a lot, as I mentioned before, a lot of the maps and such, Lincoln has already provided, and this would help wrap it all. A lot of this is from presentations that Lincoln has given during the community conversations. It would be assembling it in one place, as well as the inventory of protected lands that we own, percentages and all of that, the explanation on the financial portion. And I also think something that a financial component should be included in the plan that helps address our strategic long-term, how we're going to take care of these lands. So the alternatives analysis. So I agree with everything, and I'm ready to start making some decisions. There you go.
Thanks, Sandy. David?
Was it Miles next, or?
No, you, and then Miles, and then Lincoln.
Okay, so a couple things. I think that the elements of a plan are really readily available. I think if we gave Lincoln 30 minutes to prepare a 3-minute speech, he'd nail it. And that's all the information's there. It would be very easy to come up with. I'm thinking a little bit about, like we've talked about Plan B, and I'm thinking about the mechanics of that, how that would go down. I assume that the Plan A is to put a full reauthorization out for 2024. If that doesn't pass, then 2026 is going to have to be when Plan B gets figured out. I'm not sure what the merits of trying to present an alternative are when you're making your pitch and putting something on the ballot. That's all.
Okay. I think we're going to have more conversation about that after lunch, but good question. Miles?
Yeah, well, so the value of a vision statement or strategic plan is communicating who we are, what we're doing to everybody that's interested. That will be presented in part on our website and in other publications that we put out there. And so right now, you know, I think what we have on our website needs more. There's room for, I definitely think, a vision statement. I'll give you, is it inappropriate to read the mandate right now, just to say what our mission is? And this is our, you know, this is what is basically available. That's all that's available, really. Is that not necessary to do? Is that helpful?
Well,
I won't read it, but I'll just say
Yeah.
that there's room for more on there about, it's a very general statement that doesn't say anything about what's important at this moment in time. And I believe that between the mandate, which is our mission statement, and a strategic plan that highlights how we're going to go about doing things and what we want to accomplish, there needs to be an identity of who we are and what we want to be achieving as a, you know, very simple couple sentences. So I think it's a minor thing, but I think it's necessary for some people. So that's all I have to say.
Miles, I'm connecting what you just said to something that Mike said earlier in the conversation, which is you operate within an existing construct and legal framework. I mean, so part of a plan would include, I'm assuming, what is your mandate that is in code. That would be something that would be a piece of this that you would want to share. Lincoln, you're next up. And then I know I said I was going to draw a line here, but Brian, we haven't heard from you in a while. So before I try and do any summary here, we'd like to hear what you're thinking. Lincoln?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'd like to hear from other people too. And candidates, if they want to weigh in, should feel free to do so. But a couple of points that I wanted to make. One on the mandate. Yeah, that's been a problem for us forever. How to present that to people. In the presentations I've been doing more recently, I've taken a stab at interpreting that in a way that I think people can understand better. So that's something that we can continue to refine. The other point I wanted to make, though, was in doing this plan and having a public outreach or essentially polling component of it, I think it's important to remember that timing is something that we just has to be kept in mind. You know, I would not advocate for doing a poll, for example, about land bank renewal in the fall of 2024 now. I think that would be a terrible idea because things change a lot over time. I think the earliest we should be going out to the community if we're going to do this kind of formal, statistically significant poll or, you know, whatever it is. So we can do other things in advance of that. We can do focus groups in advance of that. But getting that answer, really, we're talking about the end of next year at the earliest, I would say. Before that, I think that would be potentially misleading, honestly, because the public sentiment can change significantly over a year.
Thanks, Lincoln. Brian, just you said early on that you were sort of undecided. You've now listened to this conversation. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Okay. Well, I think what I'm mostly hearing from folks is that the interest and the focus in doing a specific plan right now is putting ourselves out there for renewal, putting ourselves out, telling the public who we are or reminding them who we are, and getting feedback on that. And I agree with that completely. I think we need to do that kind of a plan with a focus on our renewal effort. To me, there are two main questions that at least in my mind, that we need to focus on in that plan. Maybe this is more appropriate for our discussion later, but I'll say it now. One is the question that seems always to come up, which is how much land, conservation land, is enough? Where do you stop? Lincoln's answer to that so far, and hope I'm not mischaracterizing this, is well, it's enough when you tell us it's enough. When you don't renew. I think we need to have a more proactive answer to that. We need to tell the public what we'd like to acquire and specifically why, what needs to be conserved. So that to me is the main focus of the plan. The other issue that somebody mentioned before is that I think is kind of the elephant in the room is the financial issue about our continuation. We need to make it clear, as we always do, I think, that the main cost of the land bank is not to the general taxpayer, but to conservation buyers. That's real important, but it's not the whole answer. I think what we don't talk about is that there is and will be an increasing cost in stewardship as we acquire more lands. And somehow we need to come to grips with that in a public way. We need to justify it and make sure that the public understands and agrees that it is justified.
Thanks. You got applause from Mike on that, Ryan.
Thank you.
Krista.
I just wanted to ask a clarifying question to Lincoln about the community input. So you were saying you thought we shouldn't be questioning the public about their thoughts on renewal for at least a year. Do you see the value on checking in with the public sooner? I'm kind of thinking along the lines of the communication committee. You know, we keep trying to come up with ways that we can reach and connect with people, but I'd be curious to know if we are connecting with people. I think that something like that being done now would kind of feed into a lot of this other stuff. But are they hearing about us? If they're, you know, if we find out that we send out some kind of a significant or popular survey, a legitimate survey, and we find out that most people don't even hear anything, that's valuable information to get now. So I guess that's the kind of community input I would be advocating for. Not so much how they think about renewing us in a year, but something that's a little more tangible and allows for corrective action now.
Yeah, I'm not averse to public involvement. I think that's going to be really critical. And I think we do need to find different ways of involving the public. No, we're not reaching them. That's pretty clear from how many people have participated in the community conversations. Or, we get people, we can turn people out to meetings if there's a controversy. We know that. But in terms of overall public sentiment about the land bank, and this is such a tough place to actually get any message out because the avenues are extremely limited. But I wouldn't have a problem, as I said, with a strategy where we really look toward focus groups in advance of doing a poll where we can really, I mean, you can do it either way. I think it seems like for the hospital, you did a survey and then you did focus groups following up on the survey. So you could do it the other way around potentially. I'm just afraid of, I don't want to poll people and get an answer to a question and then have the community completely change in a year. You know, if we'd asked, I think if the library had asked the question of the voters a year ago about their issue, that this is the San Juan Island Library, and moving into their new building, they would have gotten a very different answer than they got in the fall because the context changed. So it's not particularly helpful. So that's what I'm worried about. You know, we need to know that answer. It needs to be relevant to when the vote actually happened. But we can continue to talk about public involvement approaches.
Sandy, I see you have your hand up. I was going to summarize, so please go ahead and then I'll, oh, okay. So it seems to me that there is a majority, Sandy used the word consensus, but there are a number of you that believe you have to answer the fundamental question before renewal. Both what have we done, but more importantly, what are we going to do? And that requires some level of planning to be able to answer that question. I think there is common agreement, there is consensus, if not unanimous agreement, pretty strong consensus about doing a plan. Where I'm not sure there is full agreement yet is what is in that plan and what does it look like? And I'm wondering, this puts a little burden on you, Lincoln, but I'm wondering if it would be helpful to take this guidance from today's conversation and bring back to the commission essentially a mini scope. Here is what would be included in that plan. Here is material that we already have that we could build into that plan. Here would be some new material that we might need to create if we were going to do some public engagement along the lines of this last exchange, focus groups as opposed to polling. Here's how we might think about doing that. Several of the commissioners have talked about building into this plan a financial component, looking at long-term financial obligations. So it seems like it would be helpful to pull together what a scope would look like, and along with that, what resources you think it would take to pull that together. Because it isn't clear to me from this conversation whether this would all be done in-house, whether you think you need some help for that, which it's a monetary resource question. So I'm thinking it would be helpful to look at a scope that would then allow the commission to say, well, we want it this big or we want it this big in terms of a planning document.
Well, thank God you've come up with something for me to do over my Christmas vacation, John.
I know it is.
No, I think you're right. I agree with what you're saying. Doing that outline, yeah, I'm happy.
It's an outline. It is, because I don't want to raise expectations here when I use the word scope. It's not going to be an enormous amount of detail, but I think taking this conversation and sort of, you could even be if we were going to do a strategic plan light, here's what that might look like. And if we were going to do a more robust strategic plan, here's what that might look like. And have the commission weigh those options based on this conversation. But that being said, I don't want this to be a conversation between me and Lincoln. For the commissioners, does that seem like an appropriate next step and the right direction?
Yes. A plan for a plan. I like it.
An outline for a plan.
It could
Mike?
be thought of as the table of contents. What would it contain?
And I think part of that is coming back and talking about something we haven't talked much about, which is what would be the resources need to put this together?
That's my
Staff.
that's my question to Lincoln. If we're going to, and since I've been recruited to chair next year, looking ahead to trying to keep things moving along, if you were to come back with that report in January, I would like it to include some costs based on getting outside counsel, outside consultants, looking at kind of a couple different versions, so that, because putting it all in-house on a house that's already got a chore list that's pretty extensive, I think the commission will need to know what the financial commitment would be to having someone help facilitate that. And I